a modern passenger plane that had just completed major overhaul and was preparing to fly across the Atlantic. During climb, its solid cockpit window actually started to loosen and fall off. And the culprit turned out to be a reflector lamp from the shooting scene a day earlier, where extreme pursuit of perfect light and shadow was made. This is not the plot of a thriller novel, but the real dangerous incident faced by Titan Air Flight 305 in October 2023. On October 4, 2023, Titan Air Flight 305 was scheduled to carry out a multi-day charter flight. The first leg was from London Stansted Airport to Orlando International Airport in Florida, USA. This segment was a ferry flight, mainly to transport other crew and staff. There were 11 crew members on board, including 3 pilots, 1 engineer, and 6 cabin crew. In addition, there were 9 passengers. They were either tour operators or airline employees. For the convenience of the cabin crew's work and to help with weight and balance, these passengers were seated together near the emergency exit, in the front section of the middle seats. This Airbus A321 was manufactured in 2020. It had once been used to perform VIP flight missions on behalf of the UK government. On September 23, 2023, the aircraft was sent north to Southend Airport for maintenance and overhaul. On October 2nd, it was delivered back to Titan Air. Just 1 day before delivery, on October 3, this aircraft had been used for a ground photo shoot. Afterward, the plane was inspected and prepared for a direct transatlantic flight. Since there were only 9 passengers on this flight, the journey was relatively easy. Meal service and preparations were completed with plenty of time. The flight crew requested startup and pushback clearance in advance. After the cabin was confirmed safe, the crew received taxi clearance to the holding point of runway 22. The weather that day was good. Wind 230 degrees, wind speed 10 knots, visibility over 10 kilometers, temperature 16 degrees Celsius, scattered clouds at 3,000 feet. The aircraft arrived at the holding point slightly earlier than planned. A few minutes later, clearance was given for takeoff from runway 22. The crew completed the final pre-takeoff checks. Then they pushed the thrust levers forward. The aircraft began its takeoff roll. At 11:15 local time, Titan Air Flight 305 took off smoothly, beginning its journey to the United States. The aircraft climbed as expected. The crew checked system operations and carried out climb checks. Passengers also began to settle down, preparing for the long flight. However, some passengers noticed that the cabin temperature was lower than expected, and the noise during takeoff was louder than usual. When the aircraft climbed to 10,000 feet, the seatbelt sign was turned off. A loadmaster sitting in front of the passengers got up and walked down the aisle toward the rear. When he reached near door G, he noticed the cabin noise suddenly grew louder, almost at a piercing level. The loadmaster looked around and noticed that one window appeared unusual. Upon closer inspection, he saw the window frame vibrating in the airflow, and the window panel seemed to be slipping out. The aircraft windows consist of an inner panel, an outer panel, and a seal. The panels are made of stretched acrylic material, not glass. The small hole on the inner panel is called a breather hole. It allows cabin pressure to enter the space between the inner and outer panels. At this time, the noise near the window was already loud enough to potentially cause hearing damage. The loadmaster saw that the window panel was not sealed and realized this could endanger the structural integrity of the aircraft. He immediately informed the cabin crew and entered the cockpit to tell the captain. What he did not know was that several other windows nearby were also damaged. At least one of them had completely lost its outer panel, leaving only the inner panel supporting the load. At that time, the aircraft was climbing through 13,000 feet. The crew quickly checked the pressurization system. The results showed the system was operating normally and no other indicators were abnormal. The reason for focusing on the pressurization system was because the aircraft had a potential weak point. If a window failed, it could lead to rapid or even explosive decompression. Therefore, the crew had to confirm the cabin differential pressure. Cabin differential pressure refers to the difference between the pressure inside the cabin and the atmospheric pressure outside. Most commercial airliners maintain the cabin altitude at about 8,000 feet or lower, because this is a height passengers can comfortably tolerate. As the aircraft continues to climb, the difference between outside pressure and cabin pressure keeps increasing, which adds more stress to the aircraft structure. Although under normal circumstances, the aircraft is designed to withstand these pressures, if there is a weak point in the structure, the risk from pressurization increases. As cabin differential pressure rises, this risk becomes even greater. In addition to possible structural damage, the atmospheric environment outside the cabin is extremely harsh. At an altitude of 30,000 feet, the outside temperature is about -55 degrees Celsius. At the same time, the oxygen concentration is significantly reduced, which may lead to hypoxia. Hypoxia means a lack of oxygen in body tissues, which can cause fatigue, confusion, decreased attention, loss of consciousness, and ultimately even death. This is one of the reasons why flight altitude is so critical. The higher the altitude, the faster hypoxia reactions occur. At 15,000 feet, the time of useful consciousness, meaning the time a person can still make normal corrections or protective actions, it may be 30 minutes or longer. But at 35,000 feet, this time is only 30 to 60 seconds. And in the case of explosive decompression, because the oxygen in human tissues escapes instantly, the time of useful consciousness may be cut in half. This is why passengers are told to put on their own oxygen mask first before helping others. The crew of Titan Air Flight 305 immediately contacted air traffic control and informed them that they needed to level off at 14,000 feet to check the problem. The aircraft then leveled off and reduced speed to minimize external stress on the airframe. At this point, the engineer on board and the third pilot got up to inspect the windows. After inspection, they agreed that the aircraft must return to London Stansted Airport and keep the cabin differential pressure at the lowest level. Fortunately, the problem was detected early, when the aircraft was still at a relatively low altitude, only 14,000 feet. Even so, even at this altitude, if the cabin could not maintain pressurization due to a breach in the fuselage, the outside oxygen content would still be about 40% lower than at sea level. The cabin crew simply instructed all passengers to remain seated and fasten their seatbelts, while once again reminding them how to use the oxygen masks in case of emergency. The flight crew then reported to air traffic control that they needed to descend and hold before returning to London Stansted Airport. After confirming safety in the cabin, the crew first descended to 10,000 feet, then continued down to 9,000 feet and entered a holding pattern northeast of the airport. At this time, the crew began performing the overweight landing checklist. Although there were not many passengers on board because this was a transatlantic flight, the aircraft carried a large amount of fuel. The crew confirmed that runway 22 at Stansted Airport had the required landing performance and carefully reviewed the approach and landing procedures. After completing these preparations, they left the holding pattern and began the approach. After only 36 minutes of flight, at 11:51 local time, the aircraft landed safely. It then taxied back to the apron. After the engines were shut down, the passengers disembarked. Normally, the story would end here, but in this incident, an unexpected twist appeared. A window panel falling off during flight was already unusual, but the true cause was even more bizarre. After the aircraft was shut down, the crew carried out an external inspection and found that not just one window panel was missing, but 2 additional panels were completely gone. They were then informed that during a routine runway inspection after landing, at the entrance of a high-speed exit taxiway, a broken outer window panel had been found. Further inspection revealed that a fourth window had also protruded out of its frame. When the cabin interior panels were removed, inspection showed that the window fastening devices were in good condition and properly installed. However, the foam seal material on the backside of the interior panel was found to have been burned and melted. At the same time, the damaged window panels showed deformation and shrinkage, which prevented them from effectively fitting with the rubber seals. All the affected windows were located on the left side of the aircraft, near the emergency exit above the wing. During further inspection, when part of the right side cabin interior was removed, it was found that the corresponding area on the right side also showed signs of heat damage and panel deformation, although less severe than on the left. Continuing the inspection, they also found that the underside of the left horizontal stabilizer leading edge had been pierced. Inside, small pieces of acrylic material were discovered. After removing the panel at that location, investigators began to trace back what exactly had happened to the aircraft between its last maintenance and this flight. The time window was very limited. The only situation was that the aircraft had been used for a photo shoot the day before. The investigation found that, in order to simulate a sunset effect inside the cabin, several powerful floodlights were used during the shoot. Many of these lights were positioned only about 6 to 9 meters from the windows, while according to the manufacturer's specifications, the minimum distance should have been 10 meters. Because the exposure lasted for about 4 to 5.5 hours, the floodlights generated high heat, which caused thermal damage to the windows and surrounding materials, leading to their deformation.
This was very likely because the floodlights were positioned less than 10 meters away, causing the windows, once heated, to no longer be able to properly fit with the ceiling rings, and thus become loose or even fall off during flight. One of the windows was very likely blown away by the airflow and struck the horizontal stabilizer. In this incident, signs of damage appeared at an altitude of about 10,000 feet. The flight eventually landed safely, but if the damage had been more severe, especially leading to a complete loss of window integrity, then the consequences could have been very serious. Today's story is a brief incident. The reason I wanted to share this event is because of how incredible it was. It can be said that aircraft manufacturers have long since mastered the technology of producing aircraft windows. For many years, these windows have remained safe and secure. However, this incident highlights that under extreme or rare circumstances, problems may still occur. Fortunately, this time the aircraft returned to the airport safely. If cabin pressure had been allowed to continue increasing, it could have led to rapid decompression or even caused structural damage to the aircraft in flight.